Hello, welcome to Season 3, Episode 1 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And we are starting our first episode, as I just said, of Season 3, starting a new book, Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth. But first, before we get into that, because this is a new season, there might be some new people stopping in to listen. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
There'll be many new listeners for Season 3.
Of course, I'm expecting thousands.
So what do you want me to say about myself? You just told me right before we went on live on the air.
We're not live on the air. That's not how this works.
That's a recording.
Yes.
But it's live to us. We are alive. I am a 52-year-old lawyer, small-town lawyer in Missouri with 4 sons.
Yes.
And
I think that's
I'm married.
Yes,
so.
but you also have a background in philosophy.
Yes. I have a degree in philosophy.
Which has proved very useful in your life.
Actually, it is. Are you mocking me?
No, I'm not mocking you.
It's very useful, especially the logic side of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a degree in philosophy from that prestigious university, studying philosophy at the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Yes.
Which
known
is
worldwide, yes.
Notable for its strong philosophy program.
Yes.
Also,
I think Kant went there.
No, in Missouri it's Kant. There is no Kant.
Yes,
it's Kant.
Yes. Well, a little bit about myself.
Nobody asked you.
Okay. I have a 19-year-old linguistics major, also from Missouri. I'm your son, of course. Not talking to the listener there. I'm talking to you, Mark Bishop.
Yeah, you're confusing her.
Yes, our singular, the listener. But yeah, so I don't have as much of a background in philosophy. Just a little bit of background about the podcast. We did a full season 1 on the history of all of Western philosophy, followed Anthony Kenny's book, A New History of Western Philosophy, all the way from Thales up until about the 1950s. So really kind of the whole thing. And then our season 2 was all about different myths and legends from around the world, sort of retelling those and seeing what we could learn from them. And so this book here, I kind of hope is what can kind of unify those two things, seeing why myth and sort of these tales that we tell are important to our lives today, what the philosophy is there and how they are, should still be around, and we should keep telling these things.
Yes. And I remember this is a book. Do we already introduce the book?
I was gonna say a few things about it.
The Power of Myth.
Yes.
It's interviews of Joseph Campbell by Bill Moyers.
Yes.
And if I vaguely recall seeing this live, or not live, but when it was first broadcast, I think it was like 15 years old. Yes.
It's actually, I have some
85,
notes about it in here. It was a series of conversations between the journalist Bill Moyers and mythologist Joseph Campbell in 1985 and 1986 is when they had these. But it wasn't aired. It was aired on PBS in 1988, which was a year after Campbell's death in 1987. And he was, Campbell himself was somewhat well known at the time. He was a writer and a professor of literature at Sarah Lawrence College. He specialized in comparative mythology and comparative religion. He's most well known for the hero's journey, a theory of his that I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit.
I'm thinking about becoming a teacher.
Yes, I'm aware. I think we've talked about this on the podcast, actually.
I need to go back and get my master's degree, but I don't want to spend any money on it.
That's the issue.
That's the only holdup now. I would definitely do it, and I really just want to do it just to cause trouble in academia. Oh, I shouldn't have said that here. They may check up on me when I apply.
I'm sure they'll listen to every minute of these podcasts. I think we're like
I'll become so prominent that they will have teams of people studying this. Well, maybe it'll be.
Is that a threat?
Maybe you'll be so prominent that there'll be teams of people trying to divine, because we really haven't had. You mentioned how we had a podcast season about history of Western philosophy. I don't feel like any real advances have happened since the 1940s or earlier. But maybe it's because it's too recent. But it's like maybe all things have already been known. But now it's almost like
I'm sure you'll find some new things.
Well, it's almost like we have to re-articulate it.
Yeah, and that's actually what a lot of this is about, kind of looking into the past and seeing, what is there to learn from that. Yes, I have also here a note about these conversations, that they were a range of topics, but mostly about the importance of mythology today. And the book that we were reading contains these conversations, not quite as they aired on PBS. The editor's note here is that, they have some expanded material, so hopefully it's not just, we're reading through a transcript of an interview, but we're getting some more information. So there is a reason for you to listen to us and not just listen to the actual interview.
Well, we'll have our own commentary.
Yes, we'll have
more valuable
yes.
than the subject material.
Well, we are so much more brilliant than Joseph Campbell, of course.
Well, I don't know.
I don't think we are.
I've not met him. He's dead.
Yes. Thank you.
But you never know. But what was I going to say something? Oh, yeah, and I am not reading ahead. I think our
Neither
policy is we don't read the chapter until pretty much immediately before the podcast. So it's not like I'm going to be 4 chapters ahead.
Yeah. I have read The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
You're ahead of me.
Which is Joseph Campbell's book that kind of outlines the hero's journey. So I'm sort of familiar.
Did you enjoy that book?
I did. I thought it was a very good book.
Was it easy to read?
It was, actually.
Yeah.
He's a very good writer. He's a very, very smart person. That book was
a
from
good storyteller, I think.
Yeah, that book was from 1949, and that's kind of what made him somewhat well-known at the time. He's kind of well-known in academia, and then his popularity kind of skyrocketed a little bit later in his life. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, I figure we'll just go ahead and jump right in, look at some of the things that are contained here in the introduction.
So we'll just talk about the introduction and then kind of talk about going forward for the season.
Yes.
I think this is going to be a shorter season than the other ones.
There's only, I believe, 7 chapters in this book. So we'll see how we divide up the chapters going forward.
But we'll do a chapter a week.
I
guess we'll talk about it now.
Yeah.
That was last season the longest season? It seemed like it was.
No, season 1 was longer.
Well, the last season seemed to drag on for me.
Yeah, I figured. I think you might enjoy this one a lot more than last season. I think I'll enjoy this more than the previous 2 seasons. I've been wanting to read this book for a long time.
And I think maybe we should have like a bonus episode where after we watch the interviews, because I'm sure we can find either on YouTube or Prime or something.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
But I think it's like, how many hours is it? Several hours.
I don't know. Each chapter here is one of the episodes. So it was several episodes. So it was a 7 episode. Yeah, probably.
All right, so maybe we should do that as our bonus thing.
Yeah, sure, that'd be great.
We could do like Mystery Science Theater 2000.
Just comment over it.
Might be some trademark or copyright type stuff.
Maybe. Yeah, so the intro here is written by Bill Moyers, the journalist who had these conversations with Joseph Campbell. And it's kind of framed through his eyes as he's reminded everywhere of Campbell after his death. So this book was published, of course, after the interviews, which were released after Campbell's death. And he
I'll make a note. Bill Moyers was a real lefty, but I say lefty friends out there.
He's still alive, by the way.
Is he really?
Yeah, he's in his late 80s, but he's still alive. I checked that before we.
I wonder how he's doing. But he was of the category of people who are left, but could still write an honest story. I don't know if we have that anymore.
Yeah.
It's like one of my big gripes. It's like, and he also was a student of different subjects. He may not have known everything, but he would his interview, as I recall, was really trying to get information or wisdom or knowledge from the subject, which you don't seem to see anymore.
Yeah, that's I kind of looked up a little bit about Bill Moyers before we started this, and he just has such a wide range of stuff that he's done, of the people he's interviewed.
Right.
From what I can tell, he definitely seems passionate about every one of the topics he's talked to somebody about, and he seems to really want to learn more. So hopefully we'll kind of see that attitude throughout this book.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
And so Moyers kind of says that Campbell had a connection to mythology for nearly everything. That was a nice pop there. Thank you for that.
Sorry.
So I'm going to read a little section from the book. I hope you don't mind. I'll be reading several times from the book.
This episode?
Yes.
All right.
Once, as we were discussing the subject of suffering, he mentioned in tandem Joyce and Egyugyaruk. Who is Egyugyaruk? I said, barely able to imitate the pronunciation. Oh, replied Campbell, he was the shaman of a Caribou Eskimo tribe in northern Canada, the one who told European visitors that the only true wisdom lives far from mankind, out in the great loneliness, and can be reached only through suffering. Privation and suffering alone open the mind to all that is hidden to other. Of course, I said. Egyugyaruk. So kind of a bit of a comedic story there. Of course, nobody really outside of this Eskimo tribe, and maybe Joseph Campbell has really heard of Egyugyaruk, but really he has a connection to, as I just said, connection to mythology for just about everything. We'll see more of his theories here about how that's really universal to everybody, and just how we can see every aspect of society through these stories that we tell.
Yes, and I don't really have any memory of the program I was there. I mean, this is a long time ago, but what I'm reading in the introduction I like, because I think it hits the sweet spot for my more recent philosophy of life, which he talks about as the secret cause of all suffering is morality itself. The prime condition of life, it cannot be denied if life is to be affirmed. And I think there's a lot of like Jordan Peterson in this too, which I'm a fan of, where like the human condition is brutal, but sometimes that if you accept that suffering, that's where you can get some real understanding of yourself, and it's almost like it's kind of like the only things worth doing are difficult things. But I'm intrigued by the introduction, his description of on that side of it, and then the common themes of suffering and sacrificing yourself for others and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So he kind of goes on to talk about a conversation that Bill Moyers had with one of his colleagues, and he kind of says here that she held the familiar modern opinion that all these Greek gods and stuff are irrelevant to the human condition today. What she did not know, what most do not know, is that the remnants of all that stuff line the walls of our interior system of belief, like shards of broken pottery in an archaeological site. And then he kind of goes on. That's a
great way to look at it. And it's so true. It's like it's there, and it's he's talking about an archaeological site, but it's kind of like the foundation. It's almost like layers that like underneath the road you have the sub base, the gravel, and then you have something on top of it. You have the concrete on top of that. And if you don't have a strong base, the road's going to crumble in very short order. Yeah. And boy, there's a lot of truth to that.
And he kind of uses the example here of a judge. If we ritualize everything. That's how we give stuff authority. Really, so, if a judge was just about his job, then he could just wear a gray suit to work, and that would be fine. But we kind of ritualize that to give him more authority, more than just coercion, by robing him in these black robes and that sort of thing, making them this, I guess, symbol of power. Essentially, we have that ritual assigned to that.
Yeah, so I mean, and just talking about that from a practical point of view, being in a courtroom all the time, there's so much truth to that. There is a real sense of you have to have almost a show to it, like with stage direction, to really assert power and authority. And once you lose that, you lose control of the entire situation. So you need those kind of those accepted norms. And there's a judge that I practice in front of. Sometimes he'll come out and he won't be, sometimes he'll be a T-shirt and jeans before he takes the bench. And people who are not familiar with him don't even know that he's the judge. Yeah. And so he sits up there and people are like, who is this person? Is he going to get in trouble? Oh, it's the judge. So you kind of need those kind of symbols and that type of dressing or garb to keep the authority and the rules of civilization going.
Yeah, and he kind of goes on to say that, this is all still present, even in pop culture. It's not just in these institutions. It's, something that we keep coming back to. And he references Star Wars and how Luke Skywalker in that story really kind of encapsulates the hero's journey, and that he has to learn that we have to rely on intuition, our own being. That's sort of the message of the hero's journey. It's really not so much about, the hero's adventures and what he does. It's really about self-discovery and learning what you can do. And he kind of goes on to say that, it's not denying reason. The hero symbolizes the ability to control the irrational savage within all of us. And that the ultimate aim of the quest is not release nor ecstasy, but the power and wisdom to serve others. It's really kind of overcoming those sort of animalistic urges within us. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Freud, really, with his, the ego, the superego, and the id, with the id being, those animalistic desires, and you sort of use the ego and the superego to overcome those. But he's kind of framing this in a more, psychological and more, of course, mythological way, in that, we tell stories about that because that is what we have to do in order to live a fulfilling life. We have to overcome our own desires and lay down our lives and serve others.
Yeah, and that is contrary to the current modern ethical beliefs of so much of pop culture and so much of American society right now. And it's a real problem, because the self-denial is so frowned upon, and the argument is that, well, you're repressed if you're not trying to get your happiness and fulfilled at all levels. And that's what a lot of these battles over sexual freedom are at this point, is like, what's the difference between freedom and license? Where you just do whatever the heck you want, and he seems to be espousing what I believe which is it's your overcoming of those passions and your control of them, and through reason and thought, and of course he likes the mythology and the study of it. But the stories are overcoming those passions, and I think we're going to see that George Lucas stole this entire storyline to do the Star Wars stories, especially like Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Where he had to kind of overcome his anger and only three.
Well, I mean,
successful.
I don't think stole is the right word because, essentially Campbell's whole theory is that we've been telling this story for thousands of years.
Yeah, no, but I think he talked to Campbell,
Yeah.
and took his ideas and put it in a movie.
Yes. I mean, he definitely did sort of follow that storyline essentially as it was written in the hero's journey. But I think it's not so much, that he stole it, but he recognized it as sort of one of the universal stories that we tell, and to use that in sort of this.
I don't think Campbell would claim ownership over the.
I do not think so. I do not think so. Bill Moyers then kind of goes on to talk about Campbell's life itself. He says that he really lived life as an adventure. He kind of tells the story about how Campbell gave up the pursuit of a doctorate when he was to be when he was kind of asked to follow a very narrow curriculum. So instead, he immediately dropped the program and went out into the woods to read books about the world for 5 years. And that's literally something that he did. He dropped out of school. He just traveled around and read books about any topic that appealed to him.
It sounds like your dream.
It really does. It really does.
You just going off in a huff with a satchel full of books in the woods, eating berries and. Befriending squirrels and rabbits.
I mean, it sounds great. It sounds like a great life. And so with this sort of background, he eventually did go on and become a teacher, and he taught with great energy, and he was sort of infamous for his very huge reading assignments. And Moyers tells the story about one of Campbell's former students who was just astonished about the amount of readings, and so she spoke up in class and asked him, "Hey, how do you expect us to do all these?" And he was surprised that they had even attempted to complete the readings, saying that you have the rest of your life to do the readings. And I think that's a really neat thing, saying, it's not just about this class, use these things and apply them outside in your own life, do your own research and that sort of thing. Just go out and learn more in your own time as well. Just kind of going beyond the classroom there, which I think is a great philosophy to have.
Oh, yeah, it's the only way to really become productive and happy and over the long haul.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And just be a good person. I mean, you got to keep growing, keep learning.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, I know there's too many people I know that are just kind of, they just hit a wall and they don't even read books anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you do with your time? Well, I watch movies or shows or whatever, or get drunk.
Yeah. I mean, it all kind of goes back to the hero's journey there. And, what do we do to live a fulfilling life? It's that journey of self-discovery. And a lot of that is just learning. Keep learning, not just about yourself, but about the whole world around you. And eventually you will learn about yourself as well if you learn more about, the world as a whole.
Right. And the hero's journey is a difficult one. Mm-hmm. It's always filled with tragedy and loss and suffering.
I mean,
suffering. And you have this temptation to think, boy, would have been great to live during that time of some adventure. No. Yeah. And I'm afraid that we're going to have adventurous times soon enough. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I want to be back in today. I 5 years from now, I have this strong feeling now that 5 years from now, I'll wish I was back in today's world because it seems like it's all falling apart. But it'll be a great adventure.
Well, I mean, that's another part of the hero's journey is, it's the road of trials and the temptations and that sort of thing. But in the end, the hero comes back and he realizes that he does not have his old life back. He might return home, but he's completely changed and the world is completely changed.
Right.
But that's a good thing. He can go on and use the things that he learned to go on and do even better things in the future.
Right.
Yes.
And he's done some sort of heroic act on behalf of others.
Yes.
In the meantime.
Yes.
So it was worth it, and we hope.
Exactly. Bill Moyers then kind of goes on to talk about Campbell's memorial service, which was held at the Museum of Natural History in New York. And this museum is actually where Joseph Campbell first learned about myths initially, seeing the masks and the totem poles of the Native Americans. That's kind of what started him on this whole journey. But the point that I kind of wanted to make about this memorial service was just how well known he was in both pop culture and academia. Mickey Hart, the drummer for the Grateful Dead, performed. The poet Robert Bly played a dulcimer and read poetry. Former students and friends spoke, and all of the publishing houses were represented, as were scholars and researchers and all that sort of thing. And so it's really just kind of showing really just how well known and these two really usually completely different spheres Joseph Campbell was. And another point to make is that the conversations that are recorded here were even held at George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch. So he was really kind of, branching these two worlds in a way that I think very, very few people have ever done, which is really notable, I think.
You mean going from like celebrity and pop culture into academia and vice versa?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think anybody who's I think others have done it, but not with competence.
Yes.
They've been celebrity academics where they weren't really very good. I mean, I think the closest modern day would be somebody that breaks through, like I mentioned before, Jordan Peterson. Now, he's not accepted by a lot of pop culture, but like Joe Rogan has had him on a couple times, and he's well known. And he started out as an academic. He just resigned his position, I think, earlier this year or late last year for various reasons.
But usually when these sort of academic types become prominent, it's because of politics. And I think that's really, in a way, what Jordan Peterson has kind of been.
Not how he started.
Not how he started,
No.
but I think that's really how he's been associated with, especially in modern times. And that's kind of contributed to his. Yes.
Only because of his enemies. So he's not a prominent because of politics. He became prominent before he was on the radar of those people. With his YouTube channel, giving his lectures, they were YouTube video lectures that he was giving, academic lectures.
But I don't think he would be at this pop culture status now if it wasn't for the politics attached to him.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. We won't.
It's kind of like a what if, but I mean,
because he was very, very well known before they latched on to him. In America.
Yeah.
Now he got controversy found him when he opposed the speech laws in Canada.
Yeah.
Where they're enforcing mandatory, basically mandatory trans or gendering or whatever you want to call it. Where they were saying it could be a crime if you misgender somebody on those lines, and he opposed it not because he was unwilling to do it, just because on free speech, compelled speech grounds.
Yeah. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Joseph Campbell wasn't well known because he was like hated by one side of the politics and loved by the one of the other. He was kind of just universally, seen as kind of just a cool dude, really.
Well, also he had a lot of all of his fans seemed to be on the left.
That is
the Grateful Dead, Bill Moyers, and all that, because he fit into it. Wasn't.
Well,
I wouldn't say it's anti-Christian.
But it's definitely sort of a very naturalist, spiritualist kind of deal.
Correct. And a kind of a watered down Christianity. Like it's where you equalize the story of Jesus with
and I was going to kind of
shaman here and this tribal person here and this illiterate nomad over there, right? I mean, so, and you know what my views are. So I think he benefited from that pop culture favoring his overarching philosophy, which I don't think he was trying to say, trying to dilute the meaning of the Bible. I think he was trying to explain some commonalities, but of course I can't speak for him, and I haven't read this darn book yet. But I think that's, if I recall correctly, because this is like when I was in my teens and then early 20s. Of course, he passed before I was 20, but I think there's a little bit to go along with that, because if you're able to give a philosophical justification for diminishing Christianity, you're going to have a lot more success in pop culture in the United States in the last 4 years.
That's true. But I was going to kind of go on and mention that this was both sort of a good and a bad thing for him, particularly because, his theories were well known, but it kind of became the case, especially with George Lucas, is like, oh, well, the hero's journey is like a creative writing device.
Right,
and it's kind of just like trivializing the whole thing.
Correct.
It's like, well, there's deep psychological mening here.
Right.
But to the eyes of, thousands of people, it's just like, oh, that's just a neat way to tell a story.
Right. It's like the MacGuffin. Like if you have a movie, like a Pulp Fiction, there's a MacGuffin that everybody's trying to get to, which was that briefcase or one of the cases that had the shiny stuff in it. And you have to get the MacGuffin, whatever the MacGuffin is, and that's just kind of a plot device. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And he, fascinating individual, and interesting theories, and I'm gonna what I really liked and really struck me from this introduction is this statement by Bill Moyers, where he says, as a journalist, it is said, enjoys a license to be educated in public. We are the lucky ones allowed to spend our days in a continuing course of adult education. And if only journalists really took that view.
Yeah.
they would want to interview somebody like Trump that they personally would hate, but they want to know, they want to learn. And I don't ever see that sense of learning, and you see the same thing from maybe some of the right wing guys too. But of course, all the right wing people know of all the left wing people because they're all over the place. But I don't see that same sense of, I want to know about it. Or, they see these controversial shootings, journalists don't know. And that's why I think Bill Moyers was so good, even though he's very left of center, is that he was genuinely curious to learn things. And you can be left wing or right wing or socialist or communist or fascist and still be curious about, hey, I don't know that. Let me learn that. And I just don't see that kind of
so much of it,
honesty and curiosity anymore.
So much of it is tied to sort of like the opinion from sort of, I guess, the dying sort of journalism here is that, nobody's really picking up newspapers anymore. Hardly anybody's reading the news. And the only time you do is if the headline really catches your attention. I don't like this person. This journalist doesn't like this person. I want to hear what they have to say. And it's just a tangent about why you shouldn't, vote for this person or why this issue is important to you as a left winger. And you're not going to read anything about, the right wing side of things because you're just going to click on the thing if you agree with it.
There's a lot of truth to that as far as the market. But also there's like this now underground market, like you see in Substack or some other avenues for publication, where like Barry Weiss is a good example. She was with the New York Times. She quit there, and she now has a Substack. She's making more money now than she did as a professional journalist, and she does long form stories. And I'm not a subscriber, so I can't speak to whether they're accurate or not. But or like Glenn Greenwald is another one. He's an independent journalist. He was with the Guardian, I think, and now he has his own subscription service. It's much more productive and much more influential, oddly enough. But he's writing stuff that is independent. He's completely left wing. He's married to some dude, and he's got all these adopted kids and a bunch of dogs and stuff. But he's out there talking about how the January 6th prosecutions are unfair in light of the lack of prosecution for other rioters and disruptors of government. It's a very interesting character. He's coming from completely left wing. So I think you're right. But I think it's because of the terrible content from these journalists, and they aren't even journalists. They're just, I don't know what you call them, but they don't write the facts. They don't ask for the facts, and I'm seeing it going down to the local level because I deal with the local media periodically in my job, and I have, in a past job and that kind of stuff. And there's this weird lack of knowledge and lack of curiosity on some of their part. It's like they don't learn the subject enough to report on it accurately.
Well,
it's really weird.
This is more like the national publications, but especially now, which publication is the left wing and the right wing and what they're going to say.
It used to be that way over 100 years ago. Like the St. Louis Globe Democrat was one. Like the Washington Post historically was a Democrat Party paper. That like the Federalists had their own papers, and they were avowedly political. All their content, but in every town you'd have two at least, and they would be dailies, and they put out content about local stuff, and so it was. I don't have a problem with them being partisan, but they pretend to not be, and that's what drives me crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the issue, but I think part of the issue as well is that, the executives or whatever will not let journalists, at least I don't think, or maybe the journalists don't want to once they're already working for these companies. They don't want to, or they're not allowed to post any stories that sort of show the other side in a good light or want to bring the other's opinions in.
Yeah, they don't want to.
You don't think
so?
They
don't want to. None of them want to. I mean, we're going to see the turn this year, especially as the economy sours. We're going to see the turn this year in those major news media, Washington Post, New York Times, because they're starting to eat their own. And this victimization, it really is just a cover for the incompetent. Because if you start throwing around accusations, they can't fire you. And it's really just a competency problem and this stupidity problem and lack of an ignorance problem. But anyway, I'm going way far afield. What I'm trying to say, the bottom line is
essentially Bill Moyers is not like that.
Yeah, I mean, he was a left winger, and he was kind of a hack
But-
when it
but-
comes to some stuff like that. But he was genuinely curious about a lot of subjects,
Yes.
and he did a good job, if I recall correctly, in this.
Mm-hmm.
And he would do a good job with other interviews too. And he could interview somebody that he hated,
Mm-hmm.
and he wouldn't just be dripping with disdain. He would actually ask them a question, hoping the person would answer. And a good journalist is going to ask a question of somebody they don't like and don't agree with, in order to give that person the opportunity to share their thoughts with the public. And then there'd be enough trust in the public to understand that person was wrong.
Yeah.
And there's no trust of the public anymore.
That's
by
one of
politicians or journalists.
the issues I have. This is a little bit of a tangent, but when we bring speakers onto campus up at Truman, it's always, every single time, if it's a left wing speaker, it's like, oh, we're not going to go to that from the right, and if it's a right wing speaker, they're like, oh, we're not going to go to that, and it's like, that is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. You should be more inclined to go hear someone speak if you disagree with them.
Yes.
Right, and that's the issue that we see at every college campus. Typically when a right wing speaker comes and speaks, there's protests all over the place. Don't go see this person. Don't listen to them. They're spreading hate. They're spreading lies. It's like, just sit down and listen to what they have to say. Right. And at the end of the day, if you don't agree with them, then you don't agree with them, and you know why you don't agree with them. I think that's really what's missing in a lot of places.
Yeah, and one of the few things I specifically remember from my old philosophy, I mentioned this in the first season. My original history of philosophy professor told a story about how he had a number of books from, I forget the name of the author, but the author was one of the created the philosophical underpinnings for the Third Reich and the master race. And so he had these books, I think maybe even the original German, and he had a friend of his come over and visit, and he had these books on his bookshelf. And his friend says, why on earth do you have those books in your house? Those are awful. And he says, I need to know them so that I can refute them. I don't believe in those things, but I need to know what other people are saying so that I can know that I'm right and they're wrong, and I'm prepared to respond to them when they make these assertions. So I already know the argument. Just like General Patton read Rommel's books before they had a battle, and so he would know or be able to try to anticipate his strategy and the best thing to do, and what I do in my trial practice, when I'm preparing a closing argument, I prepare first the closing argument I would do if I were on the other side, and then I know better how to rebut that. But then I create my closing argument, and it's up to them to try to do.
Exactly.
And sometimes I'm arguing, and then I'm listening to their argument. I'm like, oh, that's terrible. I would have done a much better job. Yeah. Then other times I'm like, ooh, I didn't think of that.
Yeah. And this kind of goes into the next point that I have written here, is that Campbell really taught by example, and he did not try to talk anyone into anything. There's this quote here that I like: preachers err by trying to talk people into belief. Better they reveal the radiance of their own discovery.
Yes.
So it's not so much that you have to tell people, hey, this is how you should think. It's like, ask them the right questions, get them to come to the conclusion themselves, while also exemplifying the things that you are teaching yourself. It's lead by example, and also help people to find that truth themselves and don't just spout it out to them.
Well, I think you still need to share what you're preaching and belief in.
Yeah, I'm not denying that. I'm saying you
demand that they agree with you. If you really believe in a subject, if you're really passionate about whatever that belief is, then you're able to communicate that, and people will come along with you as long as you're making sense. But yeah, I agree with this point completely.
Yeah, this is something I think I've talked about this before on the podcast. I went to 10, 11 years of Catholic school,
right.
And a big issue I had with like a lot of the theology classes is it's really not explained, why, how, and why we came to these conclusions. Just like, this is the way that things are, and it kind of just became, like a trivia class. Here are some facts about Catholicism. Right. And it's like, I want to know how we got here. Tell me the reasoning behind all of this. Tell me all the in-depth details and that sort of thing, so I can appreciate this more, and so I can understand it fully, and so I can better agree or disagree with whatever these teachings are, rather than just have them blankly out there.
Right, and then you'd be able to defend it too.
Exactly.
I think that's more of a practical problem, and I guess maybe it goes back to journalism too. But so many Catholic school teachers don't even know the faith themselves, and so they have a guidebook, and they're doing their best, and they have faith, but they don't. They haven't studied the subject. They went and got a teaching degree. They didn't get a theology degree.
Yeah.
And
I don't necessarily blame the teachers themselves. I just blame a lot of the way that things are taught, I guess. The sort of structure that is there.
Well, that's the problem, is the teachers make their curriculum. Now, there's a general curriculum you get out of administration or the archdiocese or whatever the case may be, but, it's really up to a teacher to really be able to explain it.
That's true.
And I know your mother really, she's a Catholic school teacher and, teaching first and second grade. She's teaching sacraments for first communion. And she really had to really study it and think about it because, you get tough questions from a second grader.
Yeah.
What is that thing? Why is that? Is that God? You have to be able to know it and articulate it. And I think that is part of the problem with journalists. They don't know anything about anything. And they're so easily manipulated by people in power. They have no historical context. You're talking about like inflation this year. We're recording this. What's today's date? June 20th.
Of 2022.
Yeah. Nobody who's a journalist now, who's an acting journalist now, remembers or knows that back in 1980, I think, maybe 1980, interest rates were 20%.
Yeah.
20% when you're going to buy a house, it's been like 2 or 3% for a 30-year fixed mortgage. You do the math on a 30-year mortgage for 20%. They just don't even know that. They have no idea what happened 40 years ago, and how we're going to have to get through this thing. They're completely unprepared for what's going to hit this country in the next 6 months, and it's like the sky's falling.
Yeah,
and it's like that on every subject, every single subject, and it's just a shame that we don't have people. Of course, Bill Moyers. I don't know what his history is, but I'm sure he got a great education. It seems like that you have to work out it on your own. You don't go through college and get a great education unless you get it for yourself.
Yes.
And there's so many resources, but you have to do it on your own.
I mean, that kind of goes back to what we were saying. Just read, research. I've been lucky, I think, that in most of my classes so far, I've had good teachers who have been really good at teaching what they do for the most part. But at the same time, I like to read. I like to just learn more about things, just anything, really. And I think that's a lot of what's missing as well, is that, you go to college, a lot of these people, they go to college and they think, wow, this is a great education I'm receiving. I don't really need to do anything else.
Right.
And I think that's the real big issue, is like what we were saying, you have the readings for the rest of your lives, and do that on your own time as well.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The next point I have here is kind of about the guiding idea of Campbell's work. Reading here again from the book. He agreed that the guiding idea of his work was to find the commonality of themes in world myths, pointing to a constant requirement in the human psyche for a centering in terms of deep principles. You're talking about a search for the meaning of life, I asked. No, he said, for the experience of being alive. So it's not so much that he's, unveiling, these, the deep, underlying meaning of, everything that we're trying to do. He's just demonstrating this is what we do. This is what we have done for thousands of years.
Right.
And there has to be some meaning behind that.
Right.
I don't know the meaning myself, but it is so noteworthy that we have been telling these stories over and over again, and that they're still so prominent and still so popular within us up to this very day.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
That is.
There's these kind of generally universal stories that cross cultures and cross time. And it's almost like there's... Well, maybe it's
harmonious
or harmonizing with our soul, maybe, or maybe we're just destined to either like these or not like these or something. There's something there, and it's fascinating that he is just explaining that and letting everybody figure out the meaning or the understanding of the meaning of life on their own.
Yeah, he kind of goes on to that about like his theories of where mythology came from. He says mythology is the song of the universe. It appears everywhere in human culture. And Campbell believed that myth began really with our ancestors telling stories about the animals that they killed and where they go when they died. A good quote that I liked is that the essence of life is that it lives by killing and eating. And that's the great mystery that the original myths had to deal with. And that, how can life have to have death? And that's really the core mystery there. And then after, the hunter-gatherer societies, of course, we came to farming and to planting. And so the seed kind of became that magic symbol of the endless cycle. The seed sort of pops up all over the place. And so that's sort of the idea that we get in that, from death comes life. And he goes on to say, we have this in, Christianity and Islam and all these other places. And that's sort of the Unitarianism that you were kind of talking about earlier.
Right. And we've all gotten away from that.
Mm-hmm.
That understanding of we only live because other things die.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is true of societies,
Mm-hmm.
Power struggles and all that. And I think we're going to get a new lesson of it. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm always amused. I often think of, again, your mother's story where they, they have these little science experiments where they order the chicken's eggs and they put them in the little incubator and then they hatch. And
sometimes they don't hatch.
And sometimes they don't hatch, and then we would go out and buy baby chickens from Buckeyes and substitute them over the weekend. But I think it was that year we got the wrong type of chickens. They weren't egg-laying chickens. Anyway, so after the chickens, hatch and they're, moving about and stuff, then she takes them to a local family who has a farm, who and how the story goes. But the chickens that were either ordered or that we ended up substituting for.
Yes,
were
they're dropped off.
Chickens,
yes,
they were meat chickens,
and they were dropped off at this farm. And one of the little girls,
who's in the
class, lives on the farm, and so she was asked, "Hey, what ended up happening with those chickens? Are they still okay?" And she says, "We ate them."
Yeah, we ate them. Just kind of matter of fact, we ate them. I think they went on a visit to the farm as a field trip to see the pigs and all that stuff. And where's I think they even named them.
Yeah.
Where's Lucky and Sparky?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we ate them. and I don't think the other kids were that upset. It's like, well, you eat chickens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. That's a lesson that we've been missing for a long time. Is that it's kind of what we were saying about the hero's journey. Is there is so much hardship there, but that's why we are alive today. And I think so much of what is out there is just so much like feel good stuff. We don't want to really face a lot of the truths of things unless the aim of the story that we're reading is to get us angry about something politically, usually. Well,
and those stories are very similar too. They still have their own heroes.
Yes,
they still have the bad guys you have to overcome. They're the same themes. It's just,
but it's not the whole picture.
No, it's just a variation of I think very similar things. Like it's just that Trump is the demon that the good person overcame, and slayed that giant or whatever, and just puts it in a very, but it's a very similar themes.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Maybe if they start thinking about it, we'll have to analyze that a little.
Yeah, we will. And so then he kind of goes on to talk a little bit more about that Unitarian idea. The images of God are many. God assumes so many different masks in so many different cultures, but these comparable stories are found in all these traditions. And he kind of references one of the Hindu teachings that truth is one, the sages call it many names. So but all these, no matter the differences, all these religions, all these ideologies agree in calling us to a deeper understanding of the act of living itself. Yeah. So a little bit, kind of what you were saying, does it minimize Christianity and that sort of thing? But, really it's sort of, what is the underlying message here? Because Joseph Campbell was raised as a Catholic. I believe I was reading about this. He'd left the Catholic Church after Vatican II because he believed that really a lot of what the Catholic Church became after that council, you kind of stripped it of all its rituals. Yeah. He sort of saw it as sort of like this just feel good, benevolent force out there. While it's still doing good things, it doesn't have so much of that deeper meaning and deeper symbolism within it.
Boy, you'd be aghast at what they have now. Jesus.
No kidding.
I say Jesus is a prayer.
Yeah.
My goodness. Damn Jesuits.
we could write about the Jesuits some other time.
I'm gonna just leave it at that.
But kind of the question that I had, coming up with that is, it's sort of a chicken or the egg problem. Yes. Did we kind of develop God from all of these stories that we tell, or did we tell these stories to try and understand God? Why do we have so many differences from culture to culture? Is it because some of these cultures, saw miracles and that sort of thing, and then they wrote stories about it and it developed into its own tradition because they did see, something real? Or do we make up something, from our own psychological sort of, depths, I guess?
Yeah, or, there's one truth and the rest of them are just wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that's your opinion. I'm sure that's your belief.
There are a lot of people that make mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we are both Catholics, and so we would both believe that, the Catholic teaching is correct. But it's kind of what I'm saying. I think we all inherently, try to know about God. I think that's something that just about every person has some sort of desire there. To know what is beyond, essentially.
Right. And if not that, then maybe one step closer, which is knowing what's the nature of yourself and your life.
Yes.
And then I think that's a little bit more basic, maybe. Who am I and what am I doing here?
Yes.
And also, and then I think it's interrelated with, who created this? And is there a God? Is there some being greater than me? Is there something controlling this or controlling me, or is there going to be something after
I mean, so it's so natural to tell all these similar stories while so completely different at the same time.
Well, I mean, it seems like a lot of the same themes. I mean, there's...
Well, we're all trying to answer the same question. I think the question is the same in every religion. I think the answer is different.
What's the question?
That's a good question.
Oh,
I don't know what the question is, but I think...
the question is, how do you live a good life?
Yes.
Don't you think?
Yes.
Isn't that really... What is the meaning? How do I lead a meaningful life?
I think there's something to add on to there. How do I live a good life, and why do I have this life? I think that's also just as important, because then you could just write, manner books essentially on how you should live your life. That doesn't get into the sort of spiritual nature of things.
Well, that's why it's a myth and not just an instruction guide. It's
I guess it's but I think
give you a lesson.
Yes, but I think that's why we need that extra question in there. If we were just asking how to live a good life, then I don't think we would develop myths.
No, it's good life, not how to lead a moral life. Is what I meant by good, not just what's the most
utilitarian, beneficial,
practical life.
I guess
it's not the most practical. Being a hero, a true hero in your own story, is not what is the best for me or the best for the most people. It's what's the best moral life. Don't you think?
I guess so, but I do still think that we have to get a little bit of that metaphysical question there, because
that is
yes, but I think
that is the metaphysical question, isn't it?
I guess so, but I don't see how we get from there to all of these deities are out there, because I think you have to acknowledge that something gave us this life, and so that's sort of the question of why do we have this life? How do we live a good life, and why do we have this life? The how and the why.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's the second question is what is the best way to live the moral life or the correct life. And why is that so?
Yes.
What is it that gives the authority for that determination that this is the correct moral life?
Yes.
And that's where the deities come in, and that's where the higher power comes in. That type of thing is trying to explain why is this? Because it's not. I don't know that there's a single moral philosophy that just talks about utilitarianism.
Yes.
Because except for the communist, which is really a religion, socialist communist is their own form of religion without God, and they are abhorrent. I mean, if you really do follow the utilitarian philosophy of life, you're just doing math, and you always end up killing a lot of people. You do math equations about what's right or wrong, people die in big numbers.
Yes, true, very true. The next point that I have here is he kind of talks about the synthesis of science and spirit. I'm going to read again from the book. Campbell was no pessimist. He believed that there is a point of wisdom beyond the conflicts of illusion and truth by which lives can be put back together again. Finding it is the prime question of his time. In his final years, he was striving for a new synthesis of science and spirit. The shift from a geocentric to a heliocentric worldview, he wrote after the astronauts touched the moon, seemed to have removed man from the center, and the center seemed so important. Spiritually, however, the center is where sight is. Stand on a height and view the horizon. Stand on the moon and view the whole earth rising, even by way of television in your parlor. So sort of this bridging the gap of what is divinity? Why is this divine? Sort of is sort of this diminishing question, kind of in the eyes of many. It's replaced by science. We don't need all this divine stuff. We just need the science. And what Campbell's kind of saying is that, well, we're just using the science to look more into this universe, to look more and ask these even bigger questions than we were asking before. He kind of goes on to say that science has not diminished humans or divorced us from divinity, but has enabled us to realize that we are a reflection of the universe, God's ears, eyes, thinking, and word. Sort of looking at it as though, it's kind of another question, what is our purpose in this world? Why is this, this whole universe created and that sort of thing? You look out into the expanse of space, and I think that's a very natural question to ask. There's just so much out there. Right. Are we at the center? And what Bill Moyers kind of says, or not what Bill Moyers, what Joseph Campbell kind of says is, well, we're always at the center because the center's where our sight is. Even if we're on the moon, we're still at the center because those are our eyes. We're looking at the Earth rising above us, and we are still at the center.
Yeah, I guess those blind people are screwed. But I was going to say something else, and that just stupid statement came out of my mouth. Oh God, I was going to say something brilliant, and it just escaped me. Well,
I don't know. Was it about that union of science and spirit?
Yeah, it was about technology. It makes a point of that in the book, and I think we're going to have it a lot about that going forward. And that the technological advances aren't going to change anything with regard to how we struggle with life. And I think that when I was reading that part in the book, I was thinking, boy, that's really one of the things that is compelling about the Star Wars movies, the first trilogy, is that there's so much technology, these lightsabers and these ray guns and all that kind of stuff, whatever they call them. But it really is just a physical struggle, and it's still, they're just scraping by, it seems like. Like Tatooine, just dirt farmers.
Well, it's very dystopian.
Well, I don't know if it's I guess it is dystopian at a certain point of view, but it's like all these technological advances have occurred. They have these slaves, which they call droids, all that type of stuff, but it doesn't change the nature of humanity and the human struggle. And I think that's true today.
Yeah. I think that's especially true, going off of Star Wars, but also in Star Trek. They have these incredible technological, discoveries, but at the end of the day, it's really a story about people.
Oh, yeah.
It's really not about space. It's about, of course it is, but it's really about, Picard, and I'm going off of the next generation, but it's really about them answering these big moral questions, essentially.
Well, and Star Trek Next Generation is really... most of it becomes a story of the exploration of what self is and what humanity is, using data as the control study of trying to define what
data being an android.
Yeah, an android, and whether it's better to be human and fallible, or the supercomputer genius guy that can remember everything and calculate everything. And they explore that in a whole bunch of different episodes. There's one where they have these little nanobites that become a larger kind of a symbiotic organization that. Anyway, it's a lot. It seems like that's what the Next Generation is mostly, when it comes down to, an exploration of what it is to be human. What is there a soul, and what is a self?
Yes.
The first Star Trek series is really an exploration of a lot of the old philosophical arguments, historical arguments. So they go back in time, or they go to this world that is kind of like a what if Nazi Germany had won. They had one episode, and which is kind of, I think that's the one where they have the drugged leader who's very much like Joe Biden. They put him in front of a TV screen, but he doesn't even know what his name is and all that stuff. But and how they use technology to, and they had the gladiator games still, that type of stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I liked in here is he says, we're at the greatest ever leaps of the human spirit to a knowledge not only of outside nature, but also of our own deep inward mystery. We're making these great advancements and everything, but at the end of the day, we're still learning about ourselves.
Right.
And that's really what we're trying to answer in myths, essentially.
And I think that's what we were forgetting, what we've forgotten, and it's a lack of humility and a lack of historical knowledge, and I don't think, it's funny because we have all these theories now that early America, the founders are immoral because they were immoral, but they act like we're not. They act like we're better, and we're the same people.
Yes.
This humanity hasn't changed. We haven't evolved from just 200 years ago or 300 years ago. We're all sinners. We just sin in different ways, and but there's this like new Victorian like moralizing, and this really Victorianism about sex, and it's just really funny to think of it in that context, because there's like this new Victorian judgment about consents and this whole procedure of having her usually to say yes or no at various stages of the interactions. It's just kind of funny about how these different procedures you had in Victorian England about courtship and who can be in the same room as somebody else, and all these other religious sects that say you can like Mormons. I don't know if they still do this, but they had a separate, once you get into the Great Hall, I think they had separate rooms for their services. I don't know if they still do that, and so it's kind of funny how it kind of overlaps over time, even with the more modern stuff. very common themes through the whole thing.
Yes, absolutely. I really like the conclusion here that Bill Moyers has, so of course I'm going to read from the book, which, as you love. It was above all the authentic life that he lived that instructs us. When he said that myths are clues to our deepest spiritual potential, able to lead us to delight, illumination, and even rapture, he spoke as one who had been to the places he was inviting others to visit. What did draw me to him? Wisdom, yes, he was very wise. And learning, he did indeed know the vast sweep of our panoramic past as few men have ever done it. But there was more. A story's the way to tell it. He was a man with 1,000 stories. This was one of his favorites. In Japan, for an international conference on religion, Campbell overheard another American delegate, a social philosopher from New York, say to a Shinto priest, "We've been now to a good many ceremonies and have seen quite a few of your shrines, but I don't get your ideology. I don't get your theology." The Japanese paused as though in deep thought and then slowly shook his head. "I think we don't have ideology," he said. "We don't have theology. We dance." And so did Joseph Campbell to the music of the Spheres.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant, and it's funny to have it explained that way. I just think it's really well written introduction, and I look forward to reading the rest of the book.
Yes, I'm glad.
I'm going to try to be less political from now on. I'm trying.
Really?
I wasn't today. I was definitely political.
I mean, I think sort of the nature of it is to apply things to current events here. I mean,
true.
So, I mean, I don't see any way we can really avoid much of it.
Well, maybe I should be less partisan, but I can't help it. Damn bastards and the other guys are so stupid.
Thank you for that. But yeah, I'm glad you really liked it. I was worried that you wouldn't.
Really?
Yes, because I think just a lot of like the sort of Unitarian ideas there. You might take offense to those, but
I don't take offense. I just argue with it.
Yes,
there's a difference, and people don't understand that. When I disagree with you, it doesn't mean I hate you.
Yes,
it means that you're wrong. It doesn't bother me that you're wrong. I'm just explaining it to you.
Yes.
You don't like me because you said this. No, I don't think one way or the other about you, but you're just wrong, and so I'm making a correction. And so I mean, I had talked about reading Alinsky's Rules for Radicals.
Yes, you did.
I don't agree with that, but I thought that would just get too partisan and be too negative and all that. I think maybe thinking ahead, maybe something like a survey of ethics, bioethics.
Sure.
There's a lot of different ethical subjects. I think I'd be fascinated by that.
Probably.
So maybe that would be something we could think about for next season.
For next season,
it's going to be relatively short.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to it. The next chapter is about myth in the modern world. So that was episode 1 of this PBS documentary. So really just, I guess, going more in detail of a lot of what we've already talked about. Right. Why mythology is still relevant today. So that's what you can look forward to next week. Any thoughts? Any closing thoughts?
No.
No? Okay. Well, I have been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
And this has been episode 1, season 3 of Unlimited Opinions. And you can also, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTDOpinions. Let us know if we missed anything. Let us know what we can do better.
Are we going to have a T-shirt contest for season 3?
I guess we should. We'll have to figure that one out. But yeah,
it'll be my quote on the back because we're alternating. Aren't we?
I guess. I guess so. Or we can design a new shirt.
Well, yeah, but I guess that's true. We have kind of a similar design.
Yes.
Oh, I just popped the microphone again. Sorry.
Yes, that's all right. I think we're about winding down here anyway. So thank you for joining us, and be sure to join us next week. That was good. I really like this so far.